So, Judy Blume Forever is the documentary on the legacy of the controversial author Judy Blume, and it's very poignant to have this type of film now, in the era of where like they're banning books and stuff like that, to talk about one of the more controversial authors who became like a bit of like a like one of those authors you gravitate towards and you can identify with more. And it's mostly because like Judy Blume has written just a ton of different types of books. She's written very a lot of stuff that kids can identify with, like with like Super Fudge and stuff like that, but books that I've read when I was a kid and like kids continue to read to this day, in addition to more like adult books that primarily just weren't afraid of like the female body and just and sexuality. As this documentary makes very clear, like Judy Blume was very upfront about talking about your body and sexuality and masturbation, and just being very upfront about it, and being very, very open, and and of course for how old Judy Blume is, and when she released a lot of like more controversial books like Wifey and stuff like that, they it was shocking for the era, and it's probably for a lot of people now too. It's still pretty shocking. I imagine it's probably going to be shocking for a lot of people who probably only know about Judy Blume through the Fudge books that they read when they were kids. Or of course this film is properly timed to come out with Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which is a great coming of age type of film, so perfectly positioned as like a supplemental material, where it's like when you get done watching that film, come watch this documentary on Judy Blume's entire legacy, and you'll see just everything that went into this author and how she composed her stories. So within the documentary, we get to hear Judy Blume in her own words describe her history. She talks about her life growing up, what inspired her to write certain books, and what's reflected in the material, her relationship with her husband and her children, and how all of that played a role in trying to make these groundbreaking books that have become so greatly revered over time. And it becomes very, very obvious, I think, when you hear like her words about what's reflected in her work. Like at one point she talks about like the abrupt death of her father, which impacted her in a heavy way and inspired her to write a book about that dealt with death in a very honest and emotional way. And then just how she dealt with her kids and finding stuff that that kids would connect with. And I love how we don't just get like interviews with Judy, we also get like archival footage of her in interviews when she was much younger, and how she brings up the idea that yes, I'm very much in tune with my childhood, which allowed me to write stuff that kids can relate to. And it feels I almost feel like it's a little bit like a dated concept, where writers tap into the idea that writers would not be able to tap into like kids would be into and write books for children. Only because when I watch the archival interviews within this film, a lot of the interviews were like really, you can recall your childhood? It's like yeah, I can remember bits and pieces of the 4th and 5th grade, and how I felt then, and the types of emotions that were swirling in my head, and convey them to that type of audience. Which is great. They reveal stuff within stuff like Tales of a 4th Grade Nothing, which I actually do remember reading that book, and it's fascinating just to see all the stuff in her life that cropped up to form these stories, and stories that I think. That stories that did affect Judy Blume's life in a very meaningful way. There are a few scenes in this film where Judy Blume will actually read passages from her books and recall where she was when she was writing this type of material, and how it affected her. And she breaks down. At one point she's just like she's breaking into tears while she's reading a particular passage, and she's just like, oh, I can't do this. I know I said I'm going to do this. I am going to do this, but it's hard to get through this. It's so it's one of those things. It's like it's earnest, it's honest, and she wants it to be conveyed, but like but it's painful, and she's very open about that painfulness, and that's what attracted so many people to it. Now, of course, for being this type of documentary, you are going to get a few like, fans who, celebrity fans who come on and talk about her. So, people like Lena Dunham and Anna Conkle and Molly Ringwald and Samantha Bee all come out and say like, yes, like I read Judy Blume growing up, and I remember her books, and like, and even if you stick around in like the post credits, there are scenes of them like going through like the classic books, like, oh, look at these covers, and, like all this cool stuff. And they have like some decent stuff to say on it. Like I kind of dug how like Molly Ringwald was kind of talking up these books, saying like, oh, I had this haircut, and here's where I was when I was reading this book. So, it was fun to hear her words. But I was actually more fascinated to hear the words of other authors. In particular, like there are some authors who have banned books who are covered in this documentary who speak openly about how much they loved Judy Blume and how much they were an inspiration to her to continue writing stuff that challenged social norms and wasn't afraid to be controversial. And that daring nature to Judy, I think, is what makes her so great and rebellious, and just like you love her all the much. Like by the end of the film, she brings up the fact that like like she can't help but bring up like her age, like she's well past her 70s and all that. She keeps bringing it up, and she's like, well, like I don't feel like it. I feel like I'm the same. Like I feel like I'm youthful and that I can still do a lot of stuff. But I also like the fact that she's also very open about wanting to experience more in life rather than just relying on the past and just like recollecting everything. Like at one point she brings up how like she wrote her final novel, and she wrote it not so much as just like like she was like she was out of ideas, or she was like she wanted to close this chapter. It was more like it was the way that she describes it, just like she wanted to have different experiences and like opened up a new chapter in her life, more or less, like however you want to phrase it. But it's interesting to see the way that she progressed from that point and kind of like moved on from writing, even though like the way that she acts and the way that she talks, you feel like there's more stuff that she could be writing, but it's her life, and that's the way that she wants to live it, and the way and after everything that she's gone through and how influential she's been and what she's written, you feel like she deserves a break. She's like, so if she's like, hey, I'm done with writing I'm done with writing maybe forever. You're just kind of like, what? You've written so many cool stuff and you've inspired so many people. Sure. You've earned this. And by the end of the film, after hearing everything that she's gone through and how many people she's affected, yeah, she has earned it. So yeah, I mean, the way that I feel like the documentary is diced up well enough where like it doesn't harp too much on one area. It doesn't focus on too many talking heads who are just all gushing about Judy Blume, which it could have been. And the archival footage alone is worth watching just for that, just to get an idea of the era. Especially, oh my goodness, my favorite part of the film is when she goes on television and debates Pat Buchanan, who keeps like bringing up like sexuality and masturbation, and Judy Blume is just like, man, you were really hung up on this. What's your problem? Just and wonderful, and just like getting Judy's commentary on that, which is like, I had no idea who Pat Buchanan was, which is like, he was weird. So just getting her perspective on just her legacy and how she wrote her books, just on those merits alone. It's a fascinating documentary, and it kind of makes me want to go back and read the Fudge books.